The day Yorick Langford learned that offering bread with both hands was an orcish marriage proposal. He was already halfway through the gesture, watching the fierce, green-skinned woman before him freeze like a startled deer. Her amber eyes went wide, her small tusks visible as her jaw dropped open, and for a moment the only sound in the forest clearing was the crackling of his campfire and the distant call of a wood thrush. Yorick had simply been trying to be polite, offering her the last of his travel bread after she had helped him bandage the gash on his forearm where a wild boar had caught him off guard that morning. He had extended both palms flat beneath the cloth-wrapped loaf, a gesture his mother had taught him meant respect and generosity. The orc woman, who had introduced herself only as Grisha when she appeared from the tree line to help him stanch the bleeding, now stood completely still. Her rough spun tunic hung loose on her broad shoulders, and her dark hair was braided in intricate patterns that spoke of careful hands and patient mornings. She was perhaps 20 years old, with the kind of build that came from chopping wood and hauling water, all practical strength without unnecessary bulk. "You just proposed to me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yorick's hands remained extended, the bread growing heavier by the second. "I what? Among my people, when you offer bread with both palms open, you are asking for a life bond, a marriage." Her amber eyes flicked from the bread to his face and back again, as if she could not quite believe what she was seeing. "Did you not know this?" The bread trembled slightly as Yorick's arms began to tire, but he found himself unable to move, unwilling to drop his hands and possibly give insult. His mind raced through the past hour, trying to understand how a simple act of gratitude had become something so much larger. He was a veteran of the Northern Border Wars, a man who had seen 28 winters and thought he understood the world well enough. Clearly, he had been wrong. "I did not know," he said carefully, meeting her gaze. "I meant only to thank you for your help. You saved me from bleeding out in the woods like a fool." Grisha's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for him to name them all. Relief, perhaps. Disappointment, maybe. Something else that looked almost like hope before she shuddered it away behind a mask of stoic indifference. She reached out and took the bread with one hand, her calloused fingers brushing against his palm as she did so. "Then I will accept this as gratitude and nothing more," she said, her voice steady now. "Though you should be more careful. Not all orcs would give you the chance to explain." "Would they attack me for it?" Yorick lowered his hands, flexing his fingers to restore circulation. "Attack? No." Grisha tore a piece from the loaf and chewed it slowly before continuing. "But some would hold you to it. A proposal cannot be unmade once offered in the old ways. You would be bound to marry or face blood challenge from the woman's family." She paused, studying him with those sharp amber eyes. "Lucky for you, I have no family to demand such honor." There was a weight to those words that made Yorick's chest tighten with something like sympathy. He had seen many things during his years in the border guard, including the way humans and orcs treated each other with suspicion and contempt. The war had ended 5 years ago with an uneasy truce, but hatred did not evaporate just because generals signed papers. An orc alone in human territory, or a human alone in orc lands, faced dangers that had nothing to do with wild animals. "Will you sit?" he asked, gesturing to the log he had dragged near the fire. "Share the meal properly. I have dried meat as well and some cheese that has not yet gone rancid." Grisha hesitated, her gaze darting to the darkening forest around them. The sun was sinking behind the western hills, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that matched her eyes. Yorick could see her weighing the risks, calculating whether he was truly grateful or merely trying to lure her into a false sense of security before attacking. "I will sit," she said finally, but I keep my knife close." "As do I," Yorick assured her, settling onto his own seat across the fire. "Though I hope we will have no need of them." They ate in silence for a while, passing the bread back and forth and sharing the dried venison that Yorick produced from his pack. The cheese was indeed still good, sharp and crumbly, and Grisha made a small sound of pleasure when she tasted it that made Yorick smile despite himself. "You travel alone?" she asked after a time. "That is dangerous for a human in these woods." "The eastern reaches are still wild, and not all creatures here welcome your kind." "I could say the same to you," Yorick replied, prodding the fire with a stick until sparks rose into the gathering darkness. "These are technically human lands, according to the treaty. An orc here alone risks capture or worse." Grisha's jaw tightened, her tusks catching the firelight. "I go where I please. The treaty means nothing to one who has no clan." "Exiled." The word came out before Yorick could stop it, and he winced at his own lack of tact. But Grisha only shrugged, tearing another piece of bread with more force than necessary. "Cast out, 3 years ago, for the crime of refusing a marriage to a warrior I did not choose and would not love. Among my people, a woman may refuse a proposal, but to refuse after the bride price has been paid is seen as bringing shame to both families. So I ran, and they declared me dead." Yorick absorbed this information slowly, watching the way the firelight played across her strong features. She had been 17 when they cast her out then. Barely more than a girl, forced to survive alone in a world that wanted her dead or enslaved. The fact that she still lived, still moved through the forest with confident steps and clear eyes, spoke to a strength that had nothing to do with muscle. "I am sorry," he said, meaning it. "Do not be." Grisha met his eyes across the flames. "I prefer solitude to slavery, even a comfortable slavery with a wealthy warrior and a warm house." She paused. "And you? Why does a human veteran travel alone through dangerous woods with nothing but a pack and a sword? How did you know I was a veteran? The way you move, the scars, the fact that you carry your blade as if it is part of your body and not just a tool." She gestured at him with the cheese. "Also the insignia on your scabbard, though you have tried to rub it away. Northern Border Guard, unless I miss my guess." Yorick laughed, a short bark of sound that held more surprise than humor. "You are observant. I am alive," Grisha corrected, "which requires observation. Fair enough." Yorick leaned back against the log, feeling the ache in his wounded arm where the boar had gored him. Grisha had done good work with the bandage, cleaning the wound with water from a nearby stream and packing it with herbs that he recognized as healing plants. "I am traveling to the southern coast. There is a settlement there, New Haven, where they say veterans can claim land and start over. Build something instead of destroying it." "You are tired of war," Grisha said. "It was not a question." "I am tired of killing, of watching friends die, of following orders I know are wrong because refusing means hanging." Yorick stared into the fire, seeing ghosts in the flames. 5 years since the truce, and still we cannot let go of the hate. Still we raid across the borders and blame the other side. I want no more part in it." Grisha nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. "The orc clans are the same. They speak of honor and glory, but it is just young warriors wanting to prove themselves by killing humans. My refusal to marry was bad enough, but I made it worse by saying I saw no honor in burning human farms and killing their children. For this, I was called traitor as well as coward." They sat together as the night deepened around them. Two exiles from opposite sides of an old war, sharing bread and truth in the firelight. Yorick found himself studying Grisha when she looked away, noting the graceful line of her neck, the way her tusks gave her smile a slightly wild quality that he found oddly charming. She was beautiful in a way he had never been taught to recognize. All sharp edges and fierce strength wrapped in green skin that seemed to glow in the firelight. "You should rest," Grisha said eventually, breaking the comfortable silence. "That wound will pain you tomorrow and you need sleep to heal." "Will you be here in the morning?" Yorick asked, then immediately felt foolish for the question. She owed him nothing, had already given far more help than he deserved, but Grisha smiled, small and secret. "Perhaps. The night is long, and I have nowhere pressing to be." Yorick lay down on his bedroll, using his pack as a pillow, and watched Grisha feed more wood to the fire. She settled cross-legged on her log, her knife indeed close to hand, and began to hum a low melody that might have been a lullaby or a war song. He drifted to sleep with that sound in his ears, and for the first time in months, he did not dream of blood. The morning came cool and bright, mist rising from the forest floor in wispy columns that turned golden in the early sun. Yorick woke to find Grisha still there, sleeping now with her back against a tree and her hand resting on her knife hilt even in slumber. He rose quietly, not wanting to startle her, and went about building up the fire and setting water to boil in his small pot. Grisha's eyes opened as he returned from the stream with fresh water, and she watched him move around the camp with a wariness that spoke of long habit. Only when he poured hot water over the herbs for tea and offered her a cup did she relax slightly. "You stayed," Yorick said, handing her the cup carefully. "I said I might." She accepted the tea and inhaled the steam, eyes closing briefly in pleasure. "Mint and sweet leaf. Good choice." They shared a simple breakfast of hard biscuits softened in the tea and the last of the dried meat. Yorick's arm throbbed with a dull ache, but when Grisha checked the bandage, she pronounced it clean and healing well. "You have good blood," she said, retying the cloth with efficient movements. "Strong constitution. The boar's tusk was not deep enough to cause lasting damage." "Thanks to you," Yorick said. "If you had not appeared when you did, I would have bled far worse before I thought to use proper pressure." Grisha shrugged, but he saw the pleased color that darkened her green cheeks. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Yorick said firmly. "They would not. Most humans would have run from an orc. Most orcs would have let a human bleed. You chose differently." She met his eyes, and something passed between them, a recognition of kindred spirits in a world that had no place for either of them. Yorick felt his heart beat faster, a sensation he had not experienced in years, not since before the war when he had been young enough to believe in romance and happy endings. "How far to the coast?" Grisha asked, looking away first. 2 weeks, if I make good time and the weather holds. 3 if I have trouble." Yorick began packing his camp, rolling the bedroll with practiced efficiency. "The roads are safer closer to the settlements, but I prefer the forest paths. Less chance of meeting people who ask questions. About your past. About why a veteran is heading south instead of accepting the king's bounty to settle the northern marches." Yorick grimaced. "They want us to hold the borderlands, build farms right up against the treaty line, act as a living wall against the orc clans. Never mind that it all but guarantees another war in a generation." Grisha stood, brushing dirt from her tunic. "I should go. I have hunting to do before the day grows hot." Yorick felt a strange pang at her words, a reluctance to see her leave that made no logical sense. They had known each other less than a day, shared nothing but a meal and some honest conversation. Yet the thought of continuing alone through the forest suddenly felt unbearably lonely. "You could come with me," he said, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. "To the coast, I mean. New Haven is supposed to welcome all comers, no questions asked. They need farmers and hunters, people who know how to survive on the frontier." Grisha stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You would travel with an orc, risk the hatred of every human you meet. Yes, Yorick said simply, if you would risk the same from any orc clans we encounter. I have no clan, Grisha reminded him, but you have a people, a king, a country that fought mine for 3 generations. Traveling with me marks you as traitor or worse. Then I will be marked. Yorick shouldered his pack, testing the weight and adjusting the straps. I am done caring what small-minded fools think of my choices. I want to reach the coast and build a life that matters, a life that creates instead of destroys. If you want the same thing, then come. If not, then I wish you well and thank you again for your help. He started walking, following the faint trail that wound south through the trees, his heart hammering in his chest as he waited to hear whether she would follow. For 10 steps, 20, there was only silence behind him and the sound of his own boots on the soft earth. Then he heard her footsteps, quick and light, and Grisha fell into step beside him. I make no promises, she said, not looking at him. If we encounter trouble, I may choose to leave. Understood, Yorick said, fighting to keep the smile from his voice. And you will not slow me down if I choose to hunt or gather herbs. I would not dream of it. And if you try to trick me, to lead me into some trap or sell me to slavers, I will cut your throat in your sleep. Noted, Yorick said solemnly. Grisha finally looked at him, and her eyes held a hint of amusement beneath their fierce exterior. Then I suppose we travel together, human. Yorick, he said. My name is Yorick Langford. I know, you told me last night. You told me Grisha, but not your family name. Her expression shuddered. I have no family name. I am just Grisha now. Yorick let it drop, understanding that some wounds were too fresh to probe. They walked in companionable silence through the morning, following game trails and the occasional merchant's path through the forest. The day was fine, warm but not hot, with a breeze that kept the insects at bay and carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. Around midday, they stopped beside a clear stream to refill their waterskins and rest. Grisha disappeared into the undergrowth and returned 10 minutes later with a brace of rabbits, their necks cleanly broken. Show off, Yorick said mildly, and was rewarded with a flash of tusked smile. They made camp early that evening in a sheltered hollow between 2 hills, where a rock overhang provided protection from potential rain. Grisha skinned and prepared the rabbits with swift, efficient movements while Yorick built up the fire and rigged a simple spit for roasting. The meat cooked slowly, dripping fat into the flames and filling the air with savory smoke. You are good at camp craft, Grisha observed, watching him work. But you do not hunt, not well, Yorick admitted. I can track adequately and I know which plants are safe to eat, but I never had the patience for hunting. In the guard, we had supply wagons for food. Before that, I was a farmer's son. We raised pigs and chickens, grew wheat and turnips. No need to hunt when you have livestock. A farmer's son who became a soldier. Grisha turned the spit, checking the meat. How did that happen? Yorick settled against the rock wall, stretching his legs toward the fire. His wounded arm ached less today, Grisha's herbs doing their work. Conscription. When I was 19, the war was going badly for our side. The king decreed that every farm must send 1 son to serve. I was the youngest of 3, so my father chose me. He said my brothers were needed for the heavy work of planting and harvest. Did you want to go? No. The admission came easier than he expected. I wanted to marry the miller's daughter and take over a section of my father's land. Build a house, raise children, live a quiet life. But the king commanded, and so I went. Grisha nodded, understanding in her eyes. Among orcs, warriors are honored above all others. But I always wondered if they truly wanted to fight, or if they simply had no choice. Our clans push the strong into battle and call them heroes whether they wish it or not. Did you want to be a warrior? Yorick asked. I wanted to be a healer, Grisha said quietly. I learned herbs from my grandmother, learned which plants could cure and which could kill. I thought I might serve the clan that way, tending the wounded and the sick. But healers are not honored like warriors. They are necessary but not glorious. And when the warrior Tagra offered a bride price for me, my father accepted without asking what I wanted. Tagra was a hero, a killer of humans. To refuse him was to shame the entire clan. So you ran, Yorick said. So I ran, Grisha agreed. And for 3 years I have lived alone, using my grandmother's knowledge to survive. I heal myself, hunt for myself, answer to no one. It is a hard life, but it is mine. They ate the rabbit in silence, the meat tender and flavorful with the herbs Grisha had rubbed into it before cooking. Yorick found himself watching her again, noting the way she moved with unconscious grace, how her hands were gentle even when performing rough tasks. She was competent in a way that spoke of necessity rather than pride, doing what needed to be done without complaint or boasting. Can I ask you something? Yorick said as they finished eating. Grisha wiped her fingers on the grass and nodded. When I offered you the bread, when you thought it was a proposal, what was your first feeling? Before you realized I did not know the custom. She was quiet for so long he thought she would not answer. The fire crackled and popped, sending up sparks that died in the darkness. An owl called somewhere in the distance, hunting its own dinner. Surprise, Grisha said finally. And then, for just a moment, joy. Because you are kind and brave enough to speak honestly, and you did not recoil when you saw what I am. I thought perhaps the gods were giving me a gift, a chance at the life I once wanted. She looked at him steadily. And then you explained, and I understood it was an accident. But I will not pretend that part of me did not wish it were real. Yorick's heart thudded hard against his ribs. The words rose to his lips before he could question them, before doubt or fear could stop him. What if I made it real? Grisha's eyes widened. What? What if I offered again, knowing what it means? Yorick leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. I know we have only just met. I know it is madness to speak of marriage after a day of travel. But I also know that I have spent 9 years of my life following orders and doing what others expected of me, and it brought me nothing but scars and nightmares. You said yourself that you prefer a hard freedom to a comfortable slavery. What if we chose this, chose each other? You do not know me, Grisha said, but her voice was shaking. You do not know what I have done to survive these 3 years, the things I have stolen, the humans I have threatened to protect myself. You do not know how orc women age or whether we can even have children with humans. You know nothing except that I helped you with a wound and can cook a rabbit. I know that you chose mercy when hatred would have been easier, Yorick countered. I know that you were brave enough to refuse a life you did not want, even when it cost you everything. I know that in 1 day of traveling with you, I have felt more alive and more hopeful than I have in years. Is that not enough to start from? Grisha stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the firelight and back. This is madness. We are both running from our pasts, both alone because our people cast us out. What makes you think we can build something together when we could barely survive apart? Maybe that is exactly why we can, Yorick said. He rose and moved closer to her, careful not to crowd her, giving her space to flee if she wanted. 2 people who understand what it means to lose everything. 2 people who know the cost of choosing their own path. Grisha, I am not asking you to decide right now. I am only asking you to consider it. We are already traveling together. We already trust each other enough to share camp and conversation. Why not see where this road leads? She turned to face him, and in the firelight her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I swore I would never bind myself to anyone. I swore I would stay free. Marriage does not have to be a cage, Yorick said gently. Not if both people choose it freely and honestly. We could be partners, Grisha, equals, building a life together instead of struggling alone. And if I say no, if I choose to leave in the morning, then I will thank you for your company and continue south alone, Yorick promised. I will think well of you always and hope the road treats you kindly. But I will not pretend I do not want you to stay. I will not pretend this does not matter to me. Grisha closed her eyes, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. When she opened them again, some decision had been made, though Yorick could not read what it was. I need time, she said. I need to think. This is too large a thing to decide beside a campfire after one day. Take all the time you need, Yorick said. I am not going anywhere. They settled for the night, Yorick on one side of the fire and Grisha on the other, a careful distance maintained. But before he slept, Yorick saw her watching him, her expression thoughtful and unguarded. He smiled at her, and after a moment, she smiled back. The next 3 days passed in a rhythm of walking and camping, hunting and gathering. They spoke of small things and large, sharing stories of their childhoods and the moments that had shaped them. Grisha told him about her grandmother, a fierce old orc woman who had lived through 2 wars and refused to hate humans despite losing her husband to human blades. She used to say that hatred was easy, like rolling downhill. Grisha said as they walked through a sun-dappled glade. But love and mercy required effort, like pushing a stone up a mountain. She said the hard path was always the one worth taking. Yorick told her about his mother, who had cried when he left for the war but had pressed his father's old sword into his hands and made him promise to come home alive. She died the winter after I joined up, he said quietly. Fever took her. I got word 3 months late, and by then she was already in the ground. I never got to say goodbye. They shared meals and kept watch in turns, gradually relaxing into each other's presence. Yorick found himself looking forward to the evenings when they would sit by the fire and talk, when Grisha's careful reserve would soften, and she would laugh at his stories, or tease him about his inferior tracking skills. On the 4th day, they crested a hill and looked down into a valley where a human village sat beside a wide river. Smoke rose from perhaps 30 chimneys, and Yorick could see figures moving in the fields around the settlement. We need supplies, he said reluctantly. My food is running low and we could use fresh bread and cheese. Grisha studied the village with wary eyes. They will not welcome me. Then I will go alone. You can wait in the forest. No, Grisha's jaw set stubbornly. If you are serious about traveling together, then we do it properly. I will not hide like a criminal. Yorick wanted to argue, to insist that her safety was more important than pride, but he recognized the look in her eyes. This was a test, both of him and of the world they were trying to build together. If they were to have any chance at a real partnership, they had to face the hatred and fear as a united front. Together then, he said, and was rewarded with a firm nod. They walked into the village side by side, Yorick very aware of the way people stopped and stared as they passed. Children pointed at Grisha and clutched at their mother's skirts. Men reached for weapons that might or might not be there. Women whispered behind their hands, their expressions ranging from fear to disgust. Yorick found the general store and pushed open the door, gesturing for Grisha to enter first. The shopkeeper, a balding man with an impressive mustache, took one look at Grisha and reached under his counter. We do not serve her kind here, he said, his voice tight. Get that monster out of my shop. She is not a monster, Yorick said evenly. She is my companion and we are here to buy supplies. I have good coin and no desire for trouble. Your companion, the shopkeeper spat the word. What kind of man travels with an orc? What kind of perversion is that? Yorick felt his temper rising, the old familiar anger that had gotten him into trouble more than once during his service. But before he could respond, Grisha put a hand on his arm, her touch gentle but firm. "We will go," she said quietly. "There are other places to buy food." "No," Yorick said. He kept his eyes locked on the shopkeeper. "I am a veteran of the Northern Border Guard. I served 9 years defending ungrateful people like you from threats both real and imagined. I have earned the right to buy bread and cheese without suffering your ignorance. Now you can sell to us like a civilized man, or I can take my coin to your competitor down the street. Your choice." The shopkeeper's face purpled with rage, but he was also a merchant, and merchants understood profit. After a long, tense moment, he gave a curt nod. "Fine, but she touches nothing. You tell me what you want. I put it on the counter, you pay and leave." It was a small victory, and it cost them more than the supplies were worth, but they walked out of the shop with a full pack and their dignity intact. Grisha said nothing until they were well away from the village, climbing back into the forested hills. "You did not have to do that," she said finally. "You did not have to fight for me." "Yes, I did," Yorick replied. "If we are to do this, if we are to build a life together, then I will fight for you every day if I have to. I will not allow people to treat you as less than human when you are worth 10 of them." Grisha stopped walking, and when Yorick turned to face her, he saw tears streaming down her green cheeks. "I am not human," she said, her voice breaking. "I will never be human, no matter how much you defend me or how far we travel. The world will always see me as a monster." "Then the world is blind," Yorick said fiercely. He closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "I see you, Grisha. I see your courage and your kindness. I see the way you care for injured creatures we pass on the road. I see how you sing to yourself when you think I am not listening. I see you, and you are no monster." She pulled her hands free and scrubbed at her tears, angry at herself for showing weakness. "You are a fool, Yorick Langford, a romantic fool who sees the world as it should be and not as it is." "Maybe," Yorick agreed. "But I would rather be a fool with hope than a cynic with nothing to believe in." Grisha laughed then, a wet broken sound that was half sob. "You truly mean it, do you not? You truly want to marry me, to bind your life to an exiled orc woman with no family and no prospects?" "I do," Yorick said simply. "I want to wake up beside you and fall asleep listening to your breathing. I want to build a home with you, plant crops and raise animals, and maybe, if the gods allow, have children who will grow up knowing that love matters more than bloodlines. I want to grow old with you, Grisha. I want to choose you every single day for the rest of my life." She stared at him for a long moment, her amber eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt or deception. Yorick let her look, hiding nothing, letting her see the truth of his feelings written plainly in his expression. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am afraid to want this. I am afraid that if I let myself believe, it will all be taken away." "I am afraid too," Yorick admitted. "I am terrified. But I am more afraid of reaching the coast alone, of building a life that means nothing because I was too cowardly to reach for the one thing that could make me truly happy." Grisha took a shuddering breath, then another. When she spoke, her voice was stronger. "If I agree to this, I have conditions. Name them. I will not be a kept woman. I work beside you, share the labor equally. I am not property to be protected and displayed." "Agreed," Yorick said immediately. "I want a partner, not a servant. I will keep my own name. I will not take the human custom of adopting your family name. I am Grisha, and that is enough." "More than enough," Yorick said. "And if I find that this does not work, if I decide that I cannot live in a human world even with you beside me, you will let me go without anger or recrimination." That one was harder, but Yorick nodded. "I will not cage you. If you need to leave, I will be heartbroken, but I will not stop you." Grisha studied him a moment longer, then reached into her tunic and pulled out something that gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. It was a ring, simple and silver, wrought in an interlocking pattern that might have been vines or serpents. She held it out to him. "This was my grandmother's," she said softly. "The only thing of value I carried when I left my clan." In Orc tradition, when a woman accepts a proposal, she gives the man a token to seal the bond. "If you truly want this, then take it. Wear it, and know that I am choosing you as much as you are choosing me." Yorick took the ring with trembling fingers. It was too small for his ring finger, but it fit perfectly on his smallest finger. The metal was warm from resting against Grisha's skin, and it seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. "I will treasure it," he said. "And I will treasure you." Grisha nodded, blinking back fresh tears. Then she did something that surprised him. She pulled him close and kissed him, her tusks pressing gently against his face, her lips warm and soft. Yorick wrapped his arms around her and kissed her back, tasting salt and sweetness and the promise of a future he had never dared to imagine. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grisha smiled at him with her whole heart in her eyes. "So we are engaged," she said. "Bound by Orc tradition, if not yet by human law. What happens now?" "Now we continue to the coast," Yorick said, taking her hand and lacing their fingers together. "We reach New Haven, claim our land, and build a life together. We marry properly when we find someone willing to perform the ceremony, and we prove to the world that love is stronger than hate." "No small task," Grisha said, but she was still smiling. "We have time," Yorick assured her. "We have the rest of our lives." They walked through the remainder of the afternoon hand in hand, talking now about practical matters like what kind of house they would build, and whether they should focus on farming or herding. Grisha wanted goats, which surprised Yorick until she explained that Orc clans often kept goats for milk and meat, and she knew how to manage them. "Goats and chickens, then," Yorick said, "and a vegetable garden, maybe some fruit trees if the climate is right." "A small house to start," Grisha added. "One room practical, we can add on later if we need to." "When we need to," Yorick corrected gently. "When our family grows." Grisha's hand tightened on his, and he saw hope bloom in her expression, fragile but real. They made camp that evening in high spirits, cooking a meal together and sharing a skin of wine that Yorick had purchased in the village. The wine was cheap and sour, but it did not matter. Everything tasted better when shared with someone you loved. "Tell me about New Haven," Grisha said, leaning back against Yorick's chest as they watched the fire burn low. He had his arms wrapped around her, his chin resting on top of her head, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I have never been there," Yorick admitted. "But I have heard stories. They say it was founded by veterans like me, people who wanted no more part in the old wars. They built it on the southern coast where the land is rich and the king's reach is weak. No one asks about your past in New Haven. No one cares what you were before, only what you do now. Humans and orcs live there together, or so I have been told, along with elves and dwarves and even a few halflings. It is a place for people who do not fit anywhere else." "It sounds too good to be true," Grisha said quietly. "Like a fairy story." "Maybe it is," Yorick said. "Maybe we will get there and find it is all a lie, but maybe, just maybe, it is exactly what they say. And even if it is not, even if we have to keep traveling to find a place that will accept us, at least we will have each other." Grisha twisted in his arms to look at him. "You are certain about this, about me? Because once we reach New Haven and marry properly, there is no going back. You will be bound to an orc wife and the world will judge you for it." "Let them judge," Yorick said. He cupped her face in his hands, feeling the smooth green skin warm under his palms. I have lived my whole life trying to be what other people wanted. A good son, a loyal soldier, an obedient servant to a king I never believed in. I am done with that. I want to be what I choose to be, and I choose to be yours." She kissed him again, deeper this time, her hands fisting in his shirt as if she was afraid he might disappear. Yorick held her close and poured everything he felt into the kiss, all his hope and fear and desperate longing. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "We should sleep," Grisha said, though she made no move to leave his arms. "We have a long journey still ahead of us." "A few more minutes," Yorick bargained. "I am not ready to let go yet." So they stayed there together, watching the fire die to embers while the night deepened around them. And when they finally did settle on their respective bedrolls, they lay closer than before, their hands clasped between them, bound already by something stronger than any ceremony could make it. The next week passed in a blur of forests and hills, occasional villages and long stretches of wilderness. They learned each other's habits and preferences, the small intimacies that come from traveling together. Yorick discovered that Grisha liked to wake before dawn and watch the sunrise, that she had a beautiful singing voice when she was not self-conscious about it, that she was ticklish behind her left ear. Grisha learned that Yorick was a morning grump who needed tea before he could form coherent sentences, that he had a wry sense of humor that came out when he was relaxed, that he sometimes had nightmares about the war and woke shaking and sick. On those nights, Grisha would move her bedroll beside his and hold him until the tremors passed, murmuring wordless comfort in her native Orcish tongue. Yorick did not understand the words, but he understood the sentiment, and it helped more than he could express. They encountered other travelers occasionally, and the reactions ranged from suspicious stares to open hostility. In one village, they were run out by an angry mob that threw stones and shouted curses. Yorick took a rock to the shoulder that left an ugly bruise, and Grisha had to physically restrain him from going back to fight. "They are not worth it," she said firmly, dragging him down the road. "Let them rot in their ignorance." "They hurt you," Yorick snarled, looking at the cut on her forehead where a stone had grazed her. "I have survived worse," Grisha said, "and I will survive this. Come, we are better than they are." It was a lesson Yorick struggled to learn, but with Grisha's patient teaching, he began to understand that fighting every battle would exhaust them both. Some conflicts were better won by walking away with dignity intact. Not all humans were hostile, though. In one small farming community, an old woman invited them to share her dinner, ignoring the disapproving looks from her neighbors. She served them stew and fresh bread, and told them her son had married an orc woman during the war. "They fell in love when he was a prisoner in an orc camp," she said, her eyes distant with memory. "She helped him escape, and he took her with him. When they came home, the village rejected them both, but I would not reject my own son. I told him he was always welcome in my house, him and his wife both." "What happened to them?" Grisha asked gently. The old woman smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "They moved to the southern coast, to a place called New Haven. They write to me sometimes, tell me about their children. I have 3 grandchildren I have never met, but I know they are happy. That is enough for me." Yorick and Grisha exchanged glances, hope flaring bright between them. "New Haven is real then?" Yorick asked. "It truly exists?" "Oh yes," the old woman said. "It is real. My son says it is the only place in this cursed world where people can simply live without being hated for who they love. If you are heading that way, then you are heading toward hope. Hold on to each other, and do not let the world's cruelty make you cruel in return." They thanked her profusely and continued on their way, energized by the knowledge that their destination was not just a dream but a real place where they might build their life together. The landscape, began to change as they traveled further south. The dense forests gave way to rolling grasslands, and the air grew warmer and thick with moisture. They began to smell salt on the breeze, and Yorick knew they were getting close to the coast. On the 15th day after leaving the clearing where they first met, they crested a hill and saw the ocean spreading before them like a sheet of hammered silver. The sight stole Yorick's breath, vast and beautiful and utterly unlike anything he had experienced growing up in the landlocked northern provinces. "I have never seen so much water," Grisha said, her voice filled with awe. "Neither have I," Yorick admitted. "My father used to tell stories about the sea, but I always thought he was exaggerating. This is extraordinary." They made their way down toward the coast, following a well-traveled road now marked with signs pointing toward New Haven. Other travelers moved along the road, a diverse group that included humans and orcs traveling together, dwarves with heavy packs, and even an elf family with children riding in a covered wagon. No one stared at Yorick and Grisha. No one pointed or whispered or reached for weapons. They were just two more travelers among many, and the relief of that simple acceptance nearly brought Yorick to tears. New Haven rose before them as the sun began to set, a town of perhaps 500 souls built around a natural harbor. Buildings of wood and stone sprawled along the waterfront, and Yorick could see boats bobbing in the waves, their sails furled for the evening. Smoke rose from countless chimneys, and the sound of voices and laughter drifted on the sea breeze. They passed through the town gates unchallenged by any guard, and walked into the main square where a large wooden notice board displayed various announcements and advertisements. Yorick found the land office easily enough, a sturdy building with a sign proclaiming it open for business. Inside, a human woman with iron-gray hair looked up from her desk and smiled at them. "Welcome to New Haven," she said warmly. "How can I help you?" "We are here to claim land," Yorick said. "I am a veteran of the Northern Border Guard, and this is my betrothed Grisha." The woman's smile widened. "Wonderful. We have several plots available for homesteading. All veterans are entitled to 20 acres free and clear with the option to purchase more at reduced rates. Are you planning to farm or ranch?" "Both, hopefully," Grisha said. "Goats and chickens, vegetables and maybe some fruit trees." "Excellent. Let me show you what we have available." The woman, who introduced herself as Margaret Holloway, spread out a map and pointed to several marked sections of land within a few miles of the town. After some discussion, they settled on a parcel that included a small creek, open pasture land, and a stand of mature trees perfect for timber. "It is yours," Margaret said, making notes in her ledger. "I will file the claim with the town council, and you should have your official deed within the week. In the meantime, you are welcome to begin clearing the land and building. There is a general store 2 streets over that sells tools and supplies, and a lumberyard down by the harbor. If you need help with construction, just post a notice in the square. Folks around here believe in helping new settlers get established." "Just like that?" Yorick asked, hardly able to believe it was so simple. "No questions about why I left the guard or why I am marrying an orc?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Son, half the people in this town are running from something. The other half are here because they did not fit anywhere else. We do not ask questions because we do not want to answer them ourselves. You build your life, you treat your neighbors with respect, and you will find nothing but support here. That is the New Haven way." Yorick felt tears prick his eyes. Beside him, Grisha gripped his hand tightly, her own eyes suspiciously bright. "Thank you," Yorick managed. "You have no idea what this means to us." "I have some idea," Margaret said kindly. "My wife and I came here 10 years ago from the Eastern Kingdoms, where women like us were not permitted to marry. New Haven gave us a home when the world would not. Now we get to do the same for others. Speaking of which, if you are looking for someone to perform a marriage ceremony, the mayor is authorized to officiate. She works out of the town hall, right next to this building. Tell her Margaret sent you. They left the land office in a daze, walking aimlessly through the twilit streets of New Haven while trying to absorb the reality of their situation. They had a home now, or at least the promise of one. They had land and acceptance, and the freedom to build the life they wanted. "Should we find an inn for the night?" Grisha asked. "Or make camp outside town?" "Inn," Yorick decided. "I want to sleep in a real bed with you beside me. I want to celebrate properly." They found a boarding house run by an elderly dwarf couple who charged reasonable rates and did not blink at an orc and human sharing a room. The room was small but clean, with a real bed and fresh linens and a window that looked out toward the harbor. Yorick closed the door and turned to find Grisha watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "What is wrong?" he asked, moving to stand before her. "Nothing is wrong," Grisha said. "I am simply trying to understand that this is real. That we are here, that we are safe, that we can truly be together without hiding or running or fighting." "It is real," Yorick said, taking her hands. "We made it, Grisha. We are home." She pulled him close and buried her face against his chest, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Yorick held her tight, one hand stroking her braided hair, letting her cry out all the fear and pain and desperate hope of the past weeks. When she finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and her eyes were red, but she was smiling. "I love you," she said, the words simple and sincere. "I do not know when it happened, but I love you, Yorick Langford, and I want to marry you tomorrow if you will still have me." "Tomorrow," Yorick agreed, his heart soaring. "I will wake the mayor myself if I have to. I am done waiting. I want to call you my wife." They kissed then, deep and hungry, all the passion they had held in check during their journey finally unleashed. Yorick backed Grisha toward the bed, and she went willingly, pulling him down with her. They made love slowly and carefully, learning each other's bodies with gentle hands and whispered words. Grisha's skin was warm and smooth under Yorick's touch, her strength evident in the flex of her muscles. Yorick was careful of her tusks, kissing around them, finding the sensitive spots that made her gasp and arch into him. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, Yorick's head pillowed on Grisha's shoulder while she played with his hair. "I never thought I could have this," she said quietly. "I thought choosing freedom meant choosing loneliness." "You are not alone anymore," Yorick said. "You will never be alone again." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time since they met, neither of them had nightmares. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect day that seemed designed for new beginnings. Yorick woke first and watched Grisha sleep, marveling at the delicate curve of her tusks, and the way the morning light painted her green skin with golden highlights. She was beautiful and she was his, and he could hardly believe his luck. When Grisha's eyes opened, she smiled at him with such pure joy that Yorick felt his heart stutter. "Good morning, soon-to-be husband," she said. "Good morning, soon-to-be wife," he replied and kissed her thoroughly. They dressed quickly and made their way to the town hall, a modest building in the center of New Haven's main square. The mayor, a tall orc woman with impressive tusks and intricate tattoos covering her arms, greeted them warmly when they explained their purpose. "A wedding," she said, her voice a deep rumble of pleasure. "I love weddings." "How soon were you thinking today?" Yorick said. "If that is possible," the mayor laughed, a booming sound that filled the office. "Eager are we, I like that. Let me see. I have a meeting at noon, but I am free until then." "Will that work?" "Perfect," Grisha said. "Excellent. I will need 2 witnesses. Do you have anyone in mind?" They did not, but the mayor solved that problem by sticking her head out into the hall and calling for her assistant, a cheerful halfling woman named Rosie, and a human man who worked as the town clerk. Both agreed to witness the ceremony without hesitation. The mayor led them outside to a small garden behind the town hall, where flowering vines climbed over a wooden arbor, and the sound of the ocean provided natural music. She took her place beneath the arbor and gestured for Yorick and Grisha to stand before her. "Marriage," the mayor began, "is a covenant between 2 people who choose to bind their lives together. It is not something to be entered lightly, for it requires trust and compromise and the willingness to put another person's needs alongside your own. Do you both understand this?" "We do," Yorick and Grisha said together. "Yorick Langford, do you take Grisha as your wife to love and honor for all the days of your life?" "I do," Yorick said firmly, looking into Grisha's amber eyes. "Grisha, do you take Yorick Langford as your husband to love and honor for all the days of your life?" "I do," Grisha said, her voice strong and clear. "Have you tokens to exchange?" Yorick pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple band of gold he had purchased from the general store that morning before Grisha woke. It had cost most of his remaining coin, but it was worth it to see her eyes widen with surprise and pleasure. Grisha produced her grandmother's ring, the one she had already given him once before. Yorick wore it on his smallest finger still, but she slipped it off and held it ready. "Then exchange your tokens now and speak your vows." Yorick took Grisha's hand, his fingers trembling slightly as he slid the gold band onto her ring finger. "I give you this ring as a symbol of my love and my promise. I will stand beside you in joy and sorrow, in plenty and want, for all the days of my life." Grisha took his hand and replaced her grandmother's ring on his finger. "I give you this ring as a symbol of my love and my promise. I will stand beside you in joy and sorrow, in plenty and want, for all the days of my life." The mayor smiled, showing all her formidable tusks. "By the authority vested in me as mayor of New Haven, I declare you married. You may seal your union with a kiss." Yorick pulled Grisha into his arms and kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and hope and promise into the gesture. The witnesses applauded, and when they finally broke apart, both were grinning like fools. "Congratulations," the mayor said warmly, shaking both their hands. "May you build a good life together. Now get out of here and go start your future." They walked through New Haven as husband and wife, stopping to purchase basic supplies and tools for homesteading. The shopkeepers were friendly and helpful, offering advice on everything from seed selection to the best way to build a chicken coop. By early afternoon, they had acquired a wagon loaded with lumber, nails, tools, seed, and various household necessities. They also purchased 2 goats from a farmer on the edge of town, a mated pair that the farmer promised were excellent milkers and breeders. Yorick had his doubts about driving goats and a wagon to their new land, but Grisha handled both with easy competence, talking to the goats in soothing Orcish and keeping them calm as they made their way out of town. Their land was 3 miles from New Haven proper, accessible by a rough cart track that wound through coastal grassland. When they finally arrived, Yorick pulled the wagon to a stop and just stared at the property that was now legally theirs. The creek Margaret had mentioned ran clear and cold through the center of the parcel, bordered by willows and rushes. The pasture land rolled gently toward the coast, covered in knee-high grass that rippled like waves in the sea breeze. The stand of trees offered both lumber for building and shade from the summer sun. "It is perfect," Grisha breathed, standing beside him and surveying their new home. "It will be," Yorick agreed. "Once we build the house and clear some land and fence the pastures, But yes, it will be perfect. They spent the rest of the day setting up a temporary camp near the creek and unloading their supplies. The goats were tethered in a spot with good grass and access to water, and seemed content to graze and ignore their new owners. Yorick and Grisha worked together to raise a canvas shelter to protect their supplies from weather, and to organize the tools they would need for construction. As the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, they sat together beside a small fire and ate a simple dinner of bread and cheese and dried fruit. "Tomorrow we start building," Yorick said, leaning back against a convenient log. "I figure it will take us 2 weeks to raise the basic structure of the house, another week to get the roof on and the walls chinked. We will live rough until then, but by the time winter comes, we will have solid shelter." "I can help with the hunting while you do the heavy construction," Grisha offered. "Keep us in fresh meat, and I want to start a garden as soon as possible. We need vegetables planted if we want any harvest this year." They planned into the evening, mapping out their first season as homesteaders. It would be hard work, from dawn to dusk every day, but they would do it together. They would build something lasting, something that was entirely theirs. That night, lying together under the stars with the sound of the ocean in the distance and the creek babbling nearby, Yorick felt a peace he had never known before. This was right. This was home. This was everything he had never known he wanted. "Thank you," he said quietly into the darkness. "For what?" Grisha asked, her head on his shoulder. "For saying yes. For taking a chance on a broken soldier who had nothing to offer but hope and hard work. For being brave enough to believe we could have this." Grisha was quiet for a moment, then shifted to prop herself up on one elbow so she could look at him. In the moonlight, her eyes gleamed like molten gold. "You were not broken," she said firmly. "You were bent, perhaps, but not broken, and you offered me far more than hope. You offered me respect and partnership and a love I thought I would never have. So no, Yorick Langford. Thank you." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, and he wrapped her in his arms and held her close. The next weeks passed in a blur of labor and laughter. They worked from first light to dusk. Yorick primarily focused on the house construction while Grisha managed the hunting, cooking, and garden establishment. Other settlers from New Haven stopped by occasionally to offer help or advice, and slowly, a real community began to form. A human couple from 2 parcels over came to help raise the roof beams, bringing their 2 children who played with the goats while the adults worked. An elderly elf who lived alone on the coast taught Grisha which local plants were edible and which were medicinal. A dwarf stonemason offered to help them build a proper fireplace once the house walls were up, in exchange for help fixing his own roof. This was what community was supposed to be, Yorick realized. People helping each other not because they were forced to, but because it made everyone's life better. People looking past skin color and species to see the person underneath. The house took shape slowly but surely. It was a simple structure, one large room with a sleeping loft, but it was solid and weather-tight. The fireplace went in, as promised, beautiful stonework that would keep them warm through the winter. They built a small barn for the goats, who had already produced 3 kids, and showed no signs of slowing down. Grisha's garden flourished in the rich coastal soil. Beans climbed up poles, squash sprawled across carefully tended beds, and tomatoes ripened in the long summer sun. She preserved everything she could, teaching Yorick the orcish methods of drying and smoking meat, of making cheese from goat milk, of storing vegetables in a root cellar they dug beneath the house. They worked hard, but they also made time for joy. Evening walks along the beach, collecting shells and watching the sun set. Lazy mornings when they woke early and made love slowly, learning to navigate the differences in their bodies with increasing skill and pleasure. Evenings spent with neighbors, sharing meals and stories, and gradually building a web of friendship that made their new home feel real. 6 months after they arrived in New Haven, Grisha came to Yorick with news that made his heart stop. "I am pregnant," she said, her hand resting on her still flat belly. "I was not sure it was possible, a human and an orc, but the healer in town confirmed it. We are going to have a child." Yorick stared at her for a long moment, too stunned to speak. Then he let out a whoop of joy loud enough to startle the goats and swept Grisha into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and demanded he put her down before he made her dizzy. "A child," he said, still hardly able to believe it. "Our child. Grisha, this is extraordinary." "Are you pleased?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "I know we have only been married a short time and we are still establishing the farm, but I thought pleased," Yorick interrupted. "I am overjoyed, terrified but overjoyed. We are going to be parents, Grisha. We are going to raise a child who will grow up knowing that love matters more than bloodlines, who will never have to choose between their heritage and their happiness." How could I be anything but pleased? Relief flooded her features, and she hugged him tightly. "I was afraid you might not want this so soon." "I want everything with you," Yorick said firmly. "Children, grandchildren, a life so full of love and laughter that we forget we ever knew anything else. This is just the beginning." They told their neighbors that evening, and the response was universally positive. The human couple brought over a cradle their children had outgrown. The elf woman promised to teach Grisha the songs that would soothe a crying infant. The dwarf stonemason began carving a set of wooden toys as a gift. Grisha's pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into the winter. She remained active longer than Yorick thought wise, working in the garden and tending the goats until her belly was so large she could barely bend over. He took over more of the daily chores, wanting her to rest, but Grisha was stubborn and insisted on doing her share. "I am pregnant, not dying," she said when he tried to make her sit down. "Orc women work until their labor begins. I will not be coddled." "I am not coddling, I am caring," Yorick protested. "There is a difference." "Then care by letting me feel useful," Grisha countered. "I promise I will rest if I need to." The child came in early spring, on a morning when the first flowers were blooming in Grisha's garden, and the goats were giving birth to their own offspring. The labor was long and difficult, and Yorick spent most of it pacing outside the house while the midwife and several neighbor women attended to Grisha. Her screams of pain made him want to break down the door and demand they do something, anything, to help her. But finally, the midwife emerged with a smile on her weathered face. "You have a daughter," she said. "Healthy and strong with a good set of lungs. Mother and child are doing well." Yorick rushed inside to find Grisha propped up in their bed, exhausted but glowing with happiness. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in soft cloth, and when she pulled back the fabric to show him, Yorick's breath caught in his throat. His daughter had green skin like her mother, though a shade lighter. Her ears were pointed but not as long as Grisha's. Her eyes, when they fluttered open, were a striking blue-green that blended both parents' features. And yes, she had small tusks just beginning to emerge from her gums. Though they were smaller than a full-blooded orc child's would be, she was perfect. She was theirs. "What should we name her?" Grisha asked, stroking the baby's downy dark hair. Yorick reached out and let his daughter grip his finger with her tiny hand, her strength surprising for something so small. "I would like to name her after your grandmother if you are willing. The woman who taught you that love was worth the hard climb." Tears spilled down Grisha's cheeks. "Zelara," she said. "My grandmother's name was Zelara." Yorick Langford, Yorick said, testing the name. It is beautiful. They spent the rest of the day marveling over their daughter, counting her tiny fingers and toes, watching her sleep and wake and root for food with the single-minded determination of the newborn. Neighbors came to visit, bringing gifts and congratulations, cooing over the baby and offering advice that Yorick and Grisha mostly ignored in favor of figuring things out themselves. That night, after everyone had left and Zalara was finally sleeping in her cradle near their bed, Grisha looked at Yorick with wonder in her eyes. "A year ago I was alone in the forest," she said quietly. "I thought I would live my whole life in solitude, taking what happiness I could from small moments and never daring to want more. And now look at us. A home, a family, friends and neighbors who care. Sometimes I fear I will wake up and find it was all a dream." "It is not a dream," Yorick said, pulling her close. "It is real and it is ours, and we have built it with our own hands and hearts. And we will keep building, Grisha. We will raise our daughter to be strong and kind. We will expand the farm, help our neighbors, make New Haven the kind of place where no one has to choose between love and acceptance. We will live the life we want, and we will do it together." Grisha kissed him softly. "Together," she agreed. "Always together." Zalara made a small sound in her sleep, and they both turned to look at her, their hearts so full of love it felt like they might burst. This was what they had fought for, what they had risked everything to build. Not just a home or a farm, but a future where their daughter could grow up free from the prejudices that had nearly destroyed both her parents. As spring deepened into summer, life settled into a comfortable routine. Zalara grew rapidly, reaching for everything within her grasp and babbling in a mixture of human words and orcish sounds that made her parents laugh. The farm prospered, the garden overflowing with vegetables, the goat herd expanding until they had to build a larger barn. Yorick and Grisha worked side by side every day, partners in every sense of the word. They disagreed sometimes, even argued occasionally, but they always came back to the foundation of love and respect that had brought them together. They made decisions together, split the labor fairly, and supported each other through the inevitable challenges of homesteading. Other mixed families began to arrive in New Haven, drawn by stories of a place where love was more important than species. The town grew slowly but steadily, adding new buildings and new families, each one contributing to the tapestry of community that made the settlement feel like home. On the first anniversary of their arrival in New Haven, Yorick and Grisha stood on the hill above their farm and looked down at everything they had built. The house stood solid and welcoming, smoke rising from the chimney. The barn housed a thriving herd of goats and a small flock of chickens. The garden sprawled green and lush, promising a good harvest. Fruit trees they had planted were beginning to leaf out, their first blossoms promising future bounty. And in Grisha's arms, Zalara gurgled happily, reaching for her father with chubby green hands. "We did it," Grisha said, leaning into Yorick's side. "We actually did it." "We did," Yorick agreed, wrapping his arm around his wife and daughter. "And we will keep doing it every day for the rest of our lives." They stood there together as the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in brilliant colors. And Yorick thought back to that day in the forest when he had offered bread with both palms open, not knowing it was a proposal. Not knowing it was the first step toward the most important journey of his life. He had been a broken soldier with nothing but hope, and a vague dream of something better. She had been an exiled orc with no family and no prospects, surviving alone in a hostile world. Separately, they had been incomplete. Together, they were whole. "I love you," he said, kissing Grisha's temple. "I love you too," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder while Zalara dozed between them. They walked back down the hill together as the stars began to emerge overhead, heading toward the warm glow of lamplight in their windows. Their home, their family, their future. And it was everything they had never dared to dream, made real through courage and love and the simple act of choosing each other, every single day. The end came softly, not with drama or tragedy, but with the quiet contentment of a life well lived. Years passed, and Zalara grew into a strong, bright young woman who inherited her mother's skill with healing herbs and her father's gift for growing things. She never faced the rejection her parents had known, growing up in a community that judged her by her character rather than her mixed heritage. More children followed, 2 sons who looked more human than orc, but carried their mother's strength and their father's stubborn determination to make the world better. The farm expanded, becoming one of the most productive in the region. Yorick and Grisha became elders of the community, the couple that newcomers sought out for advice and encouragement. They watched New Haven transform from a small frontier settlement into a thriving town, a beacon of hope for anyone fleeing prejudice and hatred. They attended the weddings of other mixed couples, blessed new babies of every species and combination thereof, mourned the inevitable losses that came with time, and through it all, they loved each other. Fiercely, tenderly, with the depth that came from choosing each other every single day for decades. They grew old together, Grisha's dark hair turning gray while Yorick's face lined with wrinkles. Their hands, calloused from years of labor, remained clasped together through every joy and every sorrow. On a warm summer evening in their 50th year of marriage, they sat together on the porch of the house they had built, watching their grandchildren play in the yard while the sun set over the ocean. Zalara was inside preparing dinner, her own family gathered for the celebration. The farm bustled with 3 generations of life and laughter. "You remember," Grisha said, her voice still strong despite her years, "the day you accidentally proposed to me with bread." Yorick laughed, the sound rich and warm. "How could I forget? I thought you were going to attack me when you gasped like that." "I was so surprised," Grisha said, smiling at the memory. "This strange human, offering me marriage after knowing me for only a few hours. I thought you were either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish." "Both," Yorick said. "Definitely both." "It was the best accident of my life," Grisha said, lacing her fingers through his. "Mine too," Yorick agreed. "Everything good in my life came from that moment. Our home, our children, our life together. All because I did not know the orc custom for proposal." "The gods work in mysterious ways," Grisha said. "Or maybe," Yorick said, "maybe there are no accidents. Maybe we were always meant to find each other and the bread was just the universe's way of pushing us together." Grisha leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting perfectly against him the way she had for 50 years. "I like that thought." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared. Inside, they could hear their family laughing and talking, the sounds of home and love and belonging. Outside, the farm they had built spread around them, a testament to what 2 people could create when they chose love over fear, hope over hatred. And when Yorick Langford closed his eyes that night, his wife in his arms and his family safe around him, he fell asleep with a smile on his face, knowing that he had lived exactly the life he wanted, the life he chose. The life that began with a simple offering of bread and ended with more love than he ever thought possible. It was, he thought as sleep claimed him, a very good life indeed. The morning brought more of the same blessed routine they had known for half a century. Yorick woke beside Grisha, her breathing soft and steady, and felt grateful for another day. Their bodies were old now, joints stiff and movements slower, but their love remained as strong as ever. They spent the morning with their grandchildren, teaching the youngest ones about planting seeds and the oldest about managing the farm. Zalara had taken over most of the daily operations years ago, but Yorick and Grisha still contributed where they could, unwilling to give up the work that had defined their lives. Over the next several years, they gradually slowed down, spending more time on the porch and less in the fields. But even as their bodies aged, their partnership remained constant. They still held hands while walking to the creek. They still kissed goodnight before sleeping. They still chose each other every single day, just as they had promised. When Yorick finally passed in his sleep at the age of 82, Grisha was holding his hand as she had held it for 54 years of marriage. She mourned him deeply, but without regret, for they had lived fully and loved completely. She survived him by 3 more years, spending that time with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories of their grandfather and the accidental proposal that had started it all. When Grisha's time came, surrounded by family in the house she and Yorick had built together, her last words were simple and true. "I am coming, my love," she whispered. "Wait for me." And perhaps in whatever comes after he did. But the life they built together remained, solid and real and lasting. Their farm continued under Zalara's management, passed down through generations. The town of New Haven grew and prospered, a living monument to the idea that love could triumph over prejudice. And the story of the human veteran and the orc exile who found each other in a forest clearing was told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from accidents, from courage, from the simple choice to offer bread with both palms open. It was a story of hope, of love, of 2 people who refused to let the world's hatred define them, who built something beautiful in the face of overwhelming odds. And it was a story with the best kind of ending, the kind where love wins and families flourish, and the future is brighter than the past. It was, in every way that mattered, a story worth living, and they had lived it well.